So, hi guys, my name is Dermot, and I'm going to be the chair of today's advisory group panel. Today, I'm going to be joined with three other advisory group members, I think. I'm going to be joined by Katie, Amy, and Sean, I believe. Um, so, first of all, I'd like to thank Lisa for coming in today and giving that keynote speak, and I'd like to thank all of the organizers for getting involved today. It's a real privilege to be here and to speak at this event. This is the second time I've spoken at a head conference. You might recognize me. I was at the head conference last year as well. In that way, this is just going to kind of be a bit of a talk where we're going to explore kind of issues on the ground related to our lives as students with disabilities. And then we're going to kind of talk about our experiences in education, kind of the barriers, and kind of how we get supports and things like that. So, just to kind of set the stage, we are, ahead in AMLE's Students with Disabilities Advisory Group. So in total, there's about 19 of us, and we're disabled students in higher and further education. Currently, we meet maybe about 5 times annually so far. And then at these meetings, we kind of share our lived experiences of navigating through college, and we then feed that back into AHEAD, and thus hopefully shaping policy and strategy in both AHEAD and AMLE. So then we also collaborate very intensively with both AHEAD and AMLE to run the Power of Disability. So again, today I believe I am joined by three amazing panelists, being Katie, Amy, and Sean. Sorry if I've missed anyone there. I think I've only got Katie, Amy, and Sean today, but if there is someone else here, do be sure to jump in. And I suppose just kind of getting started then. I'm going to start off by getting us introduced. So again, my own name is Dermot Hanna, and I suppose for introductions, I'm just going to talk a little bit about myself and the experience, and then I'm going to pass on to both Katie and Sean here. So I suppose again, my name is Dermot Hanna. I'm a final year medical student in UCC. So I suppose I'm bringing to this panel a great experience in terms of, being from the real capital down in Cork, which is a lovely university. You may have read on some of the articles that it's got really great green spaces. It's a really great green university these days. So it kind of feels it's really nice to be speaking as a person from Cork on this panel. It also is a bit surreal to be nearly finished medicine, and I suppose I'm really looking forward to, talking today about my experience going through a high pressure course such as medicine, and talking maybe specifically about getting placement supports and navigating that. And then I suppose, just in terms as a fun fact about myself, and then I'll get a fun fact from my panel members, or I suppose rather than a broad general fun fact, this is a bit of a fan favorite, but my favorite pizza topping happens to be cucumber on pizza. So I'll throw it out at the other panelists as well as to what their favorite not their favorite cucumber, geez, that what their favorite pizza topping may be. So I suppose I'm going to start off with I might lead into Katie, if you'd like to introduce yourself and tell us a little about your experience in education so far.
Everyone. My name is Katie Sline. I am 24 years old, so that makes me a mature student. So I've been diagnosed with both ADHD, which is attention deficit hyperactive disorder, and autism. And so I'm studying special needs assisting and psychology in Dublin College Blackrock. And I suppose just about a bit about my past educational experience. I initially, straight after the Leaving Cert, I started studying accounting, and I was pretty unfamiliar and a bit, I suppose I lacked a bit of confidence when it came to navigating the disability services within third level education. So I actually dropped out of that course. And then between then and now, I've had about 3 different jobs. And I suppose I always knew I wanted to go back to education, but I wasn't particularly sure what I wanted to do. And in September, I made the decision to return and kind of ease myself back into education by starting off with a level 5 course in SNA and psychology. And yeah, so this year, I guess I have definitely gained a lot of experience or a lot of confidence when it comes to um, navigating college with a disability. And as for my favorite pizza topping, I would have to be a bit basic here and just say I do like a margarita, but I do like garlic, aioli, kind of the garlic dip. Yeah, so margarita and aioli would be my go-to.
That
Thank
sounds
you.
like a brilliant combination. So, Sean, I might get you to now introduce yourself and tell us a little about your experience. Thank you, Katie.
Hello everyone. First, I want to just thank everyone at Ahead for having me here today. So my name is Sean Burns. I'm 21 years of age. I'm from Limerick, and I was born with spina bifida and hydrocephalus, and I am a full-time wheelchair user. So I suppose my educational journey to now is so I'm from a very rural area, and my primary school is just down the road a small bit, but it was a very old building, and there was only about like 50 students in the whole school when I started. So that posed, I suppose, a few challenges for both myself and my family and the school to try and, sort out at that time. Luckily, we had a great community around us, and we fundraised and got supports available to me because I was the first wheelchair user in the school. Then when I went to secondary school, it was a brand new school, had just only been built a year ago in my area. So going from an old school to a brand new school was fantastic. All the supports were amazing. And then the Leaving Cert came. I did have my heart set on another university and another course. I wanted to study construction, but unfortunately, the university I wanted to go to, the supports just, weren't really up to scratch. Weren't really meeting my needs. And I said, you know what, maybe let's work a little bit harder to try and get to another university. So I am currently in third year in University of Limerick studying business and human resource management and organizational psychology. So yeah, that's kind of a bit about me. And my favorite pizza topping would probably be maybe chicken and barbecue sauce.
I can't fault you on that pizza topping either. Thank you, Sean, for introducing yourself, and that sounds like a great experience to bring forward to the discussion today. So I suppose moving forward, I suppose the next question that I kind of have is, what are some of the barriers that you guys have faced when approaching third level education so far? So I might revert back into you, Katie, if you'd like to speak on this first.
Yeah, so I feel like I could spend a whole day speaking about all the barriers within the education system for disabled people. But for me personally, a few that stick out, I suppose one would be I would experience quite a lot of I think it's called pathological demand avoidance, or it's also known as the wall of awful, which is people might view it as laziness, but it's anything but laziness. It's not a lack of motivation. Is that right? Anything but laziness, I think. Yeah.
I think so.
It's not it's not a lack of motivation, but rather it's almost extreme anxiety. And so, say for example, we finished our course 2 weeks ago, and we had 2 weeks off to study for the exams, but we were kind of pretty much just left to our own devices, and we were told, you know, try study yourself. Um, and for me, that's been incredibly difficult without the structure and routine. I think it's just been extremely difficult. And then another barrier I would say is I think a lot of people are pretty comfortable with me having a disability if it suits them or if my traits or symptoms are seen as a quirk. Um, but when it comes to things like, no matter how hard I try, I'm always late and it shocks me every single time. I always tell myself if I have something at 9 a.m., I could get up at 4 a.m. and I'd still be late. So that I suppose I suffer from time blindness as well. And no matter how hard I try to explain to people, I think it's almost seen as, me not caring or me lacking motivation. So yeah, I think those would be some of I suppose, lack of understanding in some ways would be a barrier. Not only from teachers and staff within the college, but also from classmates, I would say. Yeah.
Brilliant. Thank you so much, Katie. I think that is a really important point to raise. I think I thought that was a really, really great reflection on, in a way, sometimes we can look at or glamorize specific aspects currently of disabilities rather than recognizing the whole for what they actually are. And then when they inconvenience others, it can sometimes be like, oh, I didn't realize this part, so thank you for sharing that. Um, so Sean, I might jump to you now for any barriers that you've experienced so far during your journey through education.
Yeah, so I suppose I don't want to dwell on the negatives too much because there is some great positives, but if I am to mention two particular barriers for me, so the first thing is I find being a wheelchair user in the University of Limerick, some of the buildings are really modern, some of the buildings are really, really old. And I understand that, they can't maybe make every building accessible just that easy, there's a lot more involved. But I think when it comes to timetabling classes, we all have what's called a learning educational needs summary. So like all my reasonable accommodations are stated on that. And one of them is obviously physical accessibility of my lecture theatres, classrooms, etc. So like every year for the last 3 years since I started, nearly every time I have to either, approach lecturers to try and change locations, then the lecturers have to go to scheduling, try and change them. Then, it could take weeks to change a room. So I miss out on classes. I can't get to attend, don't get to meet my peers on a regular basis. Now I have to say the teaching staff in University Limerick are really, really helpful in terms of accommodating my learning outside of not being able to go to the classroom. So, they would meet me on one-to-one on regular intervals to try and help me as much as I can. And I'm very grateful for this, but it's still a little bit like, I'm being excluded from not being in the classroom for that number of weeks. And then I suppose when it comes to the end and when you're studying for exams, then you do miss out on some class discussions because the lecturer's not going to remember everything. They're dealing with hundreds of students every day. And you're kind of saying to yourself, oh well, I missed out on that, or how am I going to catch up on that? And very time sensitive then when you're trying to make that happen. So then another barrier I have faced is so I require a personal assistant on campus, just to carry bags around for me because I can't have any excess weight on my wheelchair. So in UL, and I think it's the same for quite a number of other universities around the country, that they hire PAs through an outside agency company. So it's not facilitated through the university. It's a separate organization and you have to deal with them directly, not your disability services. Like I've had maybe I could have like 10 PAs a year because they either maybe don't suit or the hours are obviously extremely um odd. I'm going to use the word for the staff. Like I could be in for just like an hour in the morning, then the whole day off, and then an hour in the evening. So the reliability of PAs is not very good. And I feel that the university should hire their own staff members that will be on campus whenever you need them. Because I've had situations where I've been in certain classes and I needed someone to go get something, and then I text or call the PA, and then the PA said, "Oh, I had to leave" or whatever. So that creates a lot of barriers and obviously extra time, then being late for classes, unnecessary stress. So yeah, that's kind of the two main barriers I face. but there's lots of other positives that I'll kind of discuss as we go along. But yeah.
Brilliant. Thanks, Sean. I think that was a really great reflection as well. I think it also kind of ties into our keynote speaker at the start there, Lisa, who was talking about significant barriers accessing physical venues and things like that, and feeling like you can't properly engage as a result of that. So I think it's important to share, and I thank you so much. And I would agree that in terms of the resourcing, that's an issue that maybe the university should step in to address as well. So I see that we do have Amy here. So Amy, if you'd like to quickly introduce yourself and then maybe talk about any of the barriers that you experience in education so far.
Hi, good morning. Sorry, I hurt my hip yesterday, so I just had to go and see the doctor. So I'm just going back to the car now. But yeah, so I'm Amy. I'm a second year applied psychology student in UCC. And I guess like my journey has been like tiring to say the least. And I think even just like finally, having been in hospital and stuff for my leaving cert and just having to like fight to kind of get to where I am now. I think already when I got into the course, I think I was experiencing like burnout from having to, you know, kind of work around my needs. And also, I'm the oldest in my family and I'm from like an immigrant family. So, kind of those two things combined means that, like, to try and seek support and try and seek information was very much like all on me, which is kind of tough when you're like already in a situation. I guess probably like my biggest barrier or my biggest difficulty that I've found is that I kind of I feel like, between now I understand obviously people do their best, but between, the lecturing staff, between my disability advisor, between like, my doctors, my nurses, like kind of everybody, I feel like I don't have like one central person that I can go to. So everybody kind of passes me around like a ping pong ball almost. And then it makes me feel like I'm being a subject that is like meant to be managed rather than a person who's just trying to find like what best suits them or what best works for them. So I'd say probably that's been like the hardest thing and probably the most like frustrating thing. Like even stuff with even getting in with the DSS service in UCC, it was just like you have to upload like these documents and like medical documents stuff, which I understand. But even then, like sometimes like I'd be like to my DS advisor, like I think I need this or I think I need this, and she'd be like, oh well, like we don't really have a lot of funding, so you have to get like a consultant letter to get like X, Y, and Z. So I just kind of feel like I don't know. It just feels very, like I said, kind of being like a subject that's managed rather than a person um who has like difficulties, and then I think obviously like that streams alongside like exams or like assignments and stuff, and it's like I myself like don't want to have to submit things late or like have to get a late waiver, or like if it was up to me, like I'd be in quote like in brackets like everybody else, um but obviously I can only like work with what I have and what I can. So yeah, I think it's kind of like it's not all bad. Like I do have some support, but it's kind of been like a fight to get that support. And I know it's going to be like another kind of like a struggle to get more support when I don't know, I feel like it's not something that I should be like struggling to seek either, because like obviously I have difficulties, but like I don't think it should be anything that I should feel like punished for or anything like that. So yeah, I think that's probably like the hardest one. Um, yeah.
Great. Thanks for sharing, Amy. Really appreciate that. I think that's a great reflection on a story of, I suppose, sharing your burnout journey and coming into education, and then I suppose the challenges in seeking support and finding that it was kind of a bit of an administrative hurdle. I know myself from being in UCC, one of the significant barriers that I've experienced would have been the repeated need to get multiple and tailored needs assessments for each placement. I suppose as a medical student myself, um, going into to placement where you change hospital on a month-to-month basis, and this can be quite challenging for, I suppose, securing accommodations on a repeated level. And I suppose when you go to approach your disability advisor, sometimes it can be a bit challenging in terms of they'll ask you specifically, oh, what accommodations do you want for this specific placement? And that in of itself, it's like it's a bit of another task applied onto you rather than something that happens just naturally. Now, I know that you can get, I suppose, a document that maybe shares across, but obviously then that one's not as tailored. But it is additional work, and I would say that that has been one of the significant barriers for me, I suppose, specifically as well, would be the administrative hurdle of continually accessing supports if required. And I suppose sometimes it can feel a bit overwhelming at times to engage in that. And access those supports. And I think that brings us nicely into accessing supports as our next question. So I might circle back to you now, Katie, about what has your experience been accessing supports in third level education?
Yeah, so I think there's a huge contrast between when I started my first degree of accounting in UCC and after dropping out and now. Because I think when I was younger, it was far more difficult because when I started the accounting course, it was straight after the leaving cert and I was 18. And I almost had this like want to fit in, and having a disability, or at least the label of a disability, it felt to me like I was going to be different. Obviously, I think very differently now, but so I actually tried to convince myself I wasn't autistic and didn't have ADHD. So in doing that, I actually didn't seek supports. And I think with accessing supports in third level, it's kind of difficult because you almost have to seek them out yourself. No one comes to you and says, okay, I'm gonna help you start the process of accessing supports. You almost have to initiate it yourself, or at least in my case, I found. And so and then now in Dublin College Blackrock, or it used to be called Blackrock Further Education Institute, there's only 900 people in the college. So everything is in the same building. All the staff members are in the same building, which I have found so much easier when it comes to actually seeking out supports. Because within UCC, when I was there, because it was a much bigger college and university, there was a bigger barrier between me and the lecturers. So now in my current course, I think it's actually a lot nicer for me, anyways, that I'm able to know the teacher and the teacher is able to know me. And yeah, it seems a lot more supportive, or not supportive, but easier to access. Yeah, so now I meet a one-to-one tutor once a week, and we're able to like set up goals and deadlines, which I'd find hard to set up for myself. And yeah.
Thanks for sharing about that, Katie. I think I can relate to that as well. Like, I know that I suppose I'm a person living with migraine myself, and in a way, migraine is a kind of a rhythmic wave pattern in terms of how functional sometimes you feel. And I know for the longest time, I also didn't, I viewed myself as a kind of mutually exclusive Venn diagram in a way of like, um, the part of me that was migraining, was it actually, was that the real me? Was that not me? And then identifying as someone with a disability in that way. And I suppose then accessing supports and going about it and then connecting that this part of me, migraine is a part of me and things like that. And then recognizing and becoming one with my disability essentially, because, they're not one and the same. So, I might, in the interest of time, I'm going to move on to Sean. So, Sean, how have you found accessing supports in university so far?
Yeah, so I suppose, when you're in primary school and secondary school, you do, in my experience, heavily rely like on your parents. And it seems to be all kind of smooth running. I suppose in one way you might take it for granted that, the supports are there, but you don't actually think of how these happened or how these started. So I think going from, your leaving cert then into college, you're brought in for a needs assessment. You try to give as much detail, as you can. But then, year after year, you still have to kind of remind different people that these are the supports I need. Um, and I think it's a big learning curve in terms of advocating for yourself. So, no one is going to do it for you. You have to put yourself out there and make it happen. And that creates a lot of it's time consuming, first of all. Then it creates a lot of stress in terms of, especially coming up to exams in UL. We have separate venues for DSS students. So when that area for quite some time wasn't accessible, there wasn't a suitable wheelchair accessible bathroom close by, and then I wouldn't get extra time to go to that to the bathroom during the exam, and then your time will be quite tight during the exam itself. So I think that was challenging for me for the first couple of years, having to advocate year after year for the same supports. It wasn't that anything was changing, but I think it's the understanding as well, and to create awareness that DSS staff and lecturers and university staff need to be a lot more aware of the challenges that are there. And the understanding is what I think is another big one, that they need to see the challenges on the ground for themselves, I think, to create that awareness. But definitely it is a learning curve for the future that, you do need to advocate for yourself, that no one is unfortunately going to do it for you. So that was kind of my experience. It's in one way you could say it's a big learning curve to say it was a wake up call, that everything worked well in the past and now, oh, it's all left to me. And I didn't realize how big of a task it was. Um, but yeah, hopefully things might improve as the years go by. But definitely it is a good learning experience to, I suppose, put yourself out there and make it happen for yourself.
Brilliant. Thanks, Sean. Thanks for speaking on again another story of advocating for yourself and things like that. Um, and then I'll move on to Amy. Do you have any I suppose you were briefly talking about accessing supports, and then we're going to do a really quick fire round on I suppose the advice that you guys would like to be shared. Just keeping in mind of yeah. So Amy, um, how sorry, Amy, how have you found accessing supports, keeping in mind that you've discussed a small bit of it?
Sorry, one second. I just can't hear you. One second. I might just leave and join back again. One second.
All right, no worries. In the interest of time, guys, Katie and Sean, I'm going to move on to the quick fire round of if you guys could share a bit of advice, what would it be? So, Katie, I'll go to you first.
I would say don't feel guilty or ashamed for seeking support. I always felt like, or I have felt in the past, that somebody else deserved it more than I did. But I think if the support is there for you, um, take as much support as you can. Yeah, it makes life easier. That's my advice, I would say.
Brilliant. Thanks, Katie. And then, Sean, any last bits of advice or a message to get out?
I think all in all, despite the challenges, there is also a lot of positives. I think for me over the years, I've kind of developed like a little motto for myself, and that all things are possible and there is always another way. I know it might be challenging to find that other way, but I think in the world we live in, we need to be, resilient. We need to try and move on, and try and create new ways to make it happen for yourself. If it's not going to be done for you. I'm currently working on my 8-month placement in the universal design kind of division within University Limerick, and it's been a really good learning curve about learning about universal design a little bit more clearly. And I think moving forward of adopting the altitude charter from ahead, and I think that's a great step forward and creating, as I said, that more awareness to the wider university community of accessibility in general.
Thank you, Sean. Really appreciate that. And then Amy, we're just kind of discussing now, if you had a piece of advice or a message that you'd like to share for other students with disabilities, what would that be?
Well, I guess because my primary disability, if you will, um, is my chronic migraines and kind of like balancing that and MRIs and appointments and medication and everything. And I think because like obviously it's internal, like in my brain, it's not to but it's not visible. So sometimes I kind of feel like it doesn't really count, or you know, it's kind of harder to explain or to kind of like get support because it's something that is like obviously it's affecting my brain. But I think it's just, I don't know, I think just to try and remember, and this is, I guess, for myself first and foremost, that you like, I deserve to be in spaces just as much as anybody else does. And even if my path to eventually like becoming to having my doctorate in psychology and my path at working or working to get there looks different. I'm just working with what I have, and that doesn't make me any less of a student, doesn't make me any less of a colleague, it doesn't make me any less of a person. And that it's okay if I'm kind of just kind of validate yourself that it's okay once if you're like burnt out at times, or like all of that is okay, but that basically that you deserve to be in spaces as well, um, in spite of your disability.
Brilliant. Thank you for sharing that, Amy. I suppose I can personally relate to that myself, being someone again who also suffers with migraine. So, it can be particularly tough communicating, having an invisible disability to others at times, and then occupying that space as a person with a disability. I think that's a powerful message to share. If I was to share advice myself, it would kind of be a bit of um, broad advice, but I suppose if you're a student with disability, I suppose try to get supports in early, connect with your DS advisor or whoever I suppose your disability support service is early. I find that at the start maybe your connection with them isn't really it can be very formal, but over the years, like medicine is a 5-year degree course. I've known my disability support advisor for about 5 years now, and she's a really lovely woman, and I suppose there's been challenging moments throughout, my period of study where, I've really had to rely on her, having that rapport with her over the past 5 years has been great. And so I think, if you get in and chat with your support service early, that can kind of lend to your benefit. And then, if you're struggling in classes and things like that, I know that there are some bad eggs, but, I suppose in a university environment, most lecturers and tutors should be welcoming and, warm to you approaching them and talking about, I suppose, your concerns and things like that. And I suppose if they're not, well, that's why you've got the first reason of being connected with your, advisor and things like that. And, if you're really struggling and things like that, I suppose Ahead as well can offer some really great advice just to plug Ahead in while we're while we're on the Ahead panel. I'm sorry that I didn't get to any of the questions in the chat. I suppose if any of the panelists want to respond in the chat to some of the questions there, feel free. I suppose in the interest of time, though, I would like to greatly thank all of the participants of today's panel. So Sean, Katie, and Amy, thank you so much for participating in today's panel. And I really hope that you as the audience enjoyed today's panel. Thanks for having us, guys. Really appreciate it.